All right, hello, and thank you everyone for coming to my talk, Conscious Decoupling, a business case for decoupled architecture. I'm Mike Mangi, a director of strategy with Phase 2. We've got a few other Phase 2 folks in the crowd. We're a digital agency. We specialize in Drupal development, also development delivery, UX design, strategy analysis. My Twitter handle's there if you want to follow me. So obviously this is a session about celebrity breakups. So if you came to hear about Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin's conscious uncoupling, you're in the right place. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm actually doing a presentation about a different kind of celebrity breakup. We're going to talk about Drupal and decoupling it. I'll go through the business benefits, give a few examples of some projects that Phase 2 is working on, and then talk about a few caveats. So my presentation is more about how to explain decoupled architecture to your boss, maybe your client, your CTO, your CMO. I suspect if you're here at Decoupled Dev Days, you're already sold on decoupled architecture. So you go into a meeting with the boss and he's like, okay, you've been talking nonstop about this decoupled thing. What are you talking about? What is this? And you start by, you're really excited. You start by explaining coupled architecture, a monolithic architecture, is the CMS is all one package. And maybe that means you can have a responsive design and you can give, different look and feel to devices, but it's all being served from the same place and it's all one design. Decoupled architecture might mean you can have a totally separate front end and you can serve up a completely different design to your mobile app, to your website, to a wearable, VR, but all the content being managed from one CMS. And your boss gives you that look like right over his head. He didn't understand the thing you were just saying. All right, so let's take a step back. Explaining it to your boss, you can say, there's a problem right now. There's just so many channels that brands are feeling completely paralyzed by choice. They don't know how to respond to customer behaviors, which channels are the right ones to use, which platforms to select, how to integrate everything once they've got them up and running. And there's so many front doors for a customer or a user to come. They can be coming from social media, they could come into your website, they can be coming from an app, they can be coming in a lot of different directions. And the decoupled architecture can help us address some of these problems. All right, so your boss is willing to hear some more, so I'll talk about some of the business benefits. When you decouple your architecture, it gives you some investment freedom. You can have the choice to do upgrades to your back end at a separate time from your front end, which is different than having to do a redesign, which means rebuilding everything from scratch or from the ground up. It may mean more frequent back-end upgrades or different front-end design changes. And part of the reason that this works is that JavaScript has become very powerful, right? We've got gangs of JavaScript developers. We've got React developers. We've got Angular developers. And they're able to build truly interactive experiences completely in the front end, right? And that gives us a lot of power to do something like this. As a side note, there's also a recruiting benefit here. You don't have to get hardcore Drupal developers. There's a ton, you saw gangs of JavaScript developers. They're a little more plentiful, and it also, just by talking about decoupled architecture, can help with recruiting because everybody wants to work on the coolest, latest, most modern architecture, right? And all of that can help you save recruiting costs when bringing in new employees. You have an API-first approach, and that can bring costs down in the future by allowing you to connect other channels more easily in the way that you've structured. So some new channel comes along and you want to connect it, you've built the infrastructure to do that. And that means that when you're trying to get to an omnichannel approach, so single channel, maybe that's just your website, multi-channel, you've got a website, an app, maybe some other social media service, but those are not connected together. When you have a decoupled architecture in your API approach, you're able to connect those different channels together and make a seamless experience for your users. And decoupled architecture can also mean an increased speed of future technology integrations. It's a little faster to add the channels if you've done all that back-end work to make it easy with the APIs to connect new channels. There can be publishing efficiencies. NPR kind of made COPE famous, the create once, publish everywhere. There's also kind of a movement for content as a service or write once, deliver everywhere. But having everything stored separately from your front end means that you can refactor for a different look and feel depending on the device or channel. Decoupled architecture also means that you can take advantage of granular caching. When I get into some of our client examples, I'll talk about things where you can have live weather or live scores that are real time, but other parts of the page cached, so you can serve up your content a little faster. And I will say future-proofing. I'd say business people love to hear people say this, developers say this. Fair warning, use it very sparingly. I don't know that it's totally real. But it is a little bit easier with decoupled architecture to integrate future technologies, and you can try to make that case. I want to talk about slightly different approaches when making this pitch to a CTO versus a CMO. In a nutshell, you can go to your CTO and say, hey, if we decouple our architecture, we can reuse code, and we can spend less on infrastructure in the long run. And when you go to your CMO, you can say, hey, we can reuse content, and it'll be easier to reach customers on their favorite channels. All right. So your boss is sort of starting to get it, but he's like, prove it to me, right? Like, has anybody done this? I don't believe you entirely yet. So at phase 2, we've worked with a few clients, and I'm going to give some examples of things that we've done or working on. One of our clients, Weight Watchers, has a number of challenges with their current architecture. They have inconsistent UX and design across their properties. The channels are all disconnected. They're managed individually. It's slow to get new apps and channels up and running and out to market. There's kind of a Drupalers versus everyone else thing going on there. So the front end has to connect with the Drupal folks to get anything out and up. And the design system is completely stuck in the Drupal theme. The Drupalers are calling it a little bit of what I think everyone here knows, the Drupal island. So we're planning a more flexible decoupled architecture with reusable components. That'll make it easier when we try to deliver that omnichannel experience, so we try to connect those channels together. All the teams are working now on a common platform and goals, so they're not separated from each other. We have a new standalone design system that's independent of the content. We're writing in React Native Web. So you can see here we've got the CMS backend, which is Drupal, a middle layer, which is GraphQL. And the nice thing there is that Drupal doesn't have to know anything about that middle layer, and there's some higher performance. And then we've got our front end in React Native. Okay, I think there may be some MLS folks here in the audience. And we've got some of the team members that have worked on this. And I think MLS is also a sponsor of this conference, so hello. And we're planning a decoupled architecture with them. MLS has invested very heavily in React. They're rebuilding their mobile apps in React. And a nice benefit of decoupled architecture is that the React devs don't have to know anything about Drupal. I was talking about before. They can build their thing and connect to Drupal. We're planning 100% React code reuse, which makes one source of truth for the mobile app and the website. And features like the scoreboard, schedule listing, search results, news, articles can be built once and then used in the mobile app, used in the website, used in any future apps that we want to build. So here we've got Drupal backend, React Native front end, GraphQL again in the middle to make the connections. Decoupled architecture also opens doors to having more dynamic features on the site, so we can have live updated scheduling, maybe drag and drop features and sortable content, which make a more customizable experience for the fans. We're planning to use some advanced caching features, which will allow us to serve up things directly from Drupal, but then have those live scores feed in real time. All right, and my third example is a platform we recently launched for the NBA and Turner. They had a really complex ecosystem for their content. They have site content, they have league content that they're pulling in, they again have live scores, and all of those things are managed completely separately. And when we started looking into it, we decided we didn't want to have to completely overhaul everything. So we implemented a progressive decoupling strategy. And it's more, in this case, about thinking of decoupling or headless on a kind of a spectrum. And we're using a multi-headed or hydruple approach. So like I said, they have a content ecosystem that lives in many different places. They have league data, they have scores, and it really makes sense to keep that data where it is. They also need to distribute some data back out to other Turner properties like CNN and Bleacher Report. And we had to think about where the content comes from and how we'll present it and what made the most sense for each of the different things we're connecting to. In some cases, Drupal doesn't need to know anything about the content. When we did the thinking, this is kind of the SketchUp of how we're handling it. We've got edge side includes that pull in, and there it's just a placeholder for Drupal to know where it's going to drop that content. All right, so you've made all that presentation to your boss, you've gone through some examples, and then there's always the grumpy coworker who wants to point out a few of the challenges, the issues that come with decoupled architecture. Decoupled architecture is not going to solve all your problems. You still have to think carefully about your client's readiness, their ability to take this on. It is a higher investment upfront to set up the decoupled architecture. You'll get some savings long term, but that initial investment is a little higher. You need to pay really close attention to your content model and make sure that it's clean when you're going to try to distribute across all these different channels. You now have more systems to manage, and that can make it harder to try to troubleshoot. Is it some issue with the React that you've built in the front end? Is it an issue with Drupal on the back end? Is it something going on with the middle layer or a third-party API? You do have to be careful with some of the third-party APIs and services you're connecting to, although I think that's a challenge no matter what kind of architecture you've set up. And when you do decoupled architecture, you're losing a little bit of the functionality that comes with Drupal out of the box. You may have to rebuild things like previewing and versioning and workflow and other components, which is a bigger upfront effort. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you.